if that means anything.
I see a live.
Hangout is live. Well, hello everybody. Do you want to introduce yourself? Because I don't know what you're calling yourself now.
Just Jarl is fine.
Okay, cool. So me, Darren, and Jarl, we used to make a lot of videos back in the day. We've decided to give another go. So if anybody's is watching, hello, welcome. We were very popular in our day. What we thought we'd discuss is some politicking, given huge changes in the UK, or potential huge changes in the UK. Nothing's actually happened. The timeline of events is that 3 years ago we had a referendum to stay in. Do you want to stay in the European Union or leave the European Union? Was the only question. And 52% voted they wanted to leave, 48% voted they wanted to stay. The government at the time was a Conservative government. After the referendum, the Prime Minister who set up the referendum, David Cameron, the pig-interfering David Cameron, went away and resigned, and Theresa May was the only candidate that ran for the leadership of the Tory party, and so miraculously was elected as leader. She then called a general election in 2017, and she lost the Conservative majority, which meant that she couldn't just force through her version of Brexit or whatever she wanted to do. So it meant she had to compromise or collaborate or work with other members of Parliament because she couldn't get her vision through. She decided not to do that and instead pay the DUP, which is the Northern Ireland Party, £1 billion to work with her. They refused and said they'd only do confidence and supply. So they'd only support the Conservatives on finance bills, supply, and votes of confidence, which they've done. So we're now in a position where she went away to the European Union and negotiated a deal in isolation with them. She didn't work with even most members of her own party, let alone anybody else's. She's then brought that back and was defeated 3 times in Parliament, once by an historic amount. So nobody wanted it, and she now said she wanted to work with the other members of Parliament, the Labour Party, but that working with the Labour Party looked like trying to convince them to support the deal for fear of a no-deal Brexit. That's blown up in her face, and she's been forced to resign by members of her own party. So she then we had the European elections on the Thursday. She resigned on the Friday morning, and the results came out on Sunday, in which the Conservative Party only polled 9% of the vote. A third of the people voted for the Brexit Party, which isn't, it's, as somebody said, it's not even a single issue party. It's a word, Brexit. And probably 40% overall voted for Remain parties. And a third voted for the Brexit Party, plus the 9% takes you about 39% supporting Tories or Brexit. The rest voted for sort of Remain. We don't know where Labour stands at the moment because they're trying to walk this fine line between northern working class who wanted to leave and southern middle class, liberal middle class who wanted to remain. So they've avoided taking any sides, also known as dithering and fence sitting. And the Tories got drubbed, the Labour got drubbed in the European elections and have only got 10 MEPs. The Liberal Democrats did fairly well, but Brexit won the European elections, and they've got, I think, 28 MEPs. So it's not looking great for liberalism, for Remain, for progression. But it's no clearer picture. The country is still split between this dislike of the European Union and wanting to stay in the European Union. So, Jarl, what should we do? Now you're up to speed.
Well, I really enjoy watching the Conservatives take a drubbing.
Who doesn't?
But then all those people go for the Brexit party, right? Which means that their values have not changed and have not become considerably more progressive, or even any more progressive. It's just like they've just like changed their style of, I don't know, reactionariness, or I use the word bigotry, hatred of the outside.
Yeah, interestingly, there was UKIP, United Independent Party, who got 25% of the vote in the last European elections, and that was Nigel Farage was in charge of them. But since then, they sort of tottered off to the further to the right and hired a guy called Tommy Robinson as an advisor, something to do with them. And he's a fascist. He used to run the EDL, the English Defence League, white nationalist, absolutely horrid person. And even Nigel Farage said he was a bit too racist. So Nigel Farage then left UKIP and started his own Brexit. He's been called the tapeworm of British politics because you just can't get rid of him. And he started his own Brexit party. And their issue in this general election was nothing other than no deal Brexit. So a lot of people that have voted for the Brexit party are people who are sick of this 3 years of doing nothing. The country has done nothing apart from talk about Brexit for the last 3 years and sell some arms to the Saudis. All we've done is that. So there's a lot of people who voted for the Brexit party who ordinarily I don't think would fit into the set of white nationalist, fascist, racist sort of person. All the white nationalists, fascists and racists have voted for Brexit party, but not all people who voted for Brexit have done that. I would say that I don't know of a progressive argument for voting for Brexit, though.
Actually, Arthur just sent me an article giving leftist arguments for Brexit.
Yeah,
I could pull it up, but
go on.
Essentially, the argument is that the EU is too capitalist in nature, and that's. Okay. I mean, I don't really like capitalism all that much, but you know, I think that it's important to it's not tracking the truth of the thing, right? So the people's motivations for Brexit were not anti-capitalist, and I think that it's important to stop that kind of motivation from winning. Now, I can imagine someone saying, "Well, that's an ad hominem, right?" But you should really be asking what's the best. But I think that it's not just the Brexit; it's like the way it's implemented, and the motivation for its implementation will decide how it's done. And
I'm sure socialism works best when it's implemented over a wide group of participants. It doesn't work great when it's your own household of socialism, because then it feels very much like one person's paying for everything and things like that. So where the country has been fairly left-leaning in the last 40 years, and where Europe's been left-leaning in the last 40 years, that has resulted in left-leaning policies being across the European Union. It's absolutely true to say that the European Union benefits immensely large corporations, large globalist corporations, because there's free movement of capital, there's free movement of labour. So there is this thing where jobs can quickly move from one part of the European Union to another part of the European Union, and I think Jeremy Corbyn's Euroscepticism is on that basis. That at the moment Europe's very right wing, and it is very easy to do well as a capitalist in the European Union within the global sort of market. But the problem with the European Union ultimately boils down to there are too many freedoms. So you can be a progressive capitalist and you can be a progressive socialist, and you can be, progressive is just about solving problems. Only conservatives are anti-progressive because, as their name suggests, they want to slow things down and be the answer to modern change, modern, things happening too quickly. It's not like it used to be, and things like this. And I think overwhelmingly, the voice that's been pro-Brexit has been the conservative voice. It hasn't been the socialist voice. There's been a lot of supporting people who, after the banking crisis, have suffered because we had to bail out the banks. We ran out of money, and of course that meant reduce the choice to do austerity was, rather than raising tax to pay for this debt, what we do is not raise tax and instead reduce government output. The people who are the biggest users of government services are the lower paid working class end. So they all suffered from the banking crisis. Weirdly and amazingly, after the banking crisis, lots of new shows were commissioned almost for free, called things like Benefit Street, Immigrants on the Rob, of that genre, to convince people, no, the problem isn't bankers, it's immigrants, it's foreigners. And the whole right-wing machinery has been desperate for some populist movement that they can present, I don't care what the problem is, the solution is getting rid of immigrants, reducing immigrants, because appealing to the sort of tribal urge, it seems. So I don't think whilst there are left-wing arguments for Brexit, the ones who've done the most about Brexit is the right wing, and Brexit has strengthened the right wing. It has not strengthened the left wing. In the same way as we used to do videos, atheist videos, against Christianity, Islam, Judaism, and things like that, but we do less of them now, or we don't do them because it arms the right. Do you know what I mean? They take the arguments, the intellectual arguments against the idea of religion, change the word Islam for the word Muslim, and suddenly you've got Islamophobia, you've got anti-Muslim, you've got all of these problems. And you look at who benefits, the cui bono of Brexit, and it's the right. It's the right-wing, emotional, slow down progress and all that sort of thing. It isn't the left. The left, if there are arguments for Brexit on the left, nobody's using them because no socialist entity is becoming stronger because of Brexit.
Yeah, I think that last thing is a really interesting thought of why we stopped. And I think that's definitely part of it. Although I think part of it is just that atheism in itself is kind of a non-thesis and sort of runs out of interest pretty quick. Yeah. But I think what I'd like to talk about the most maybe is, the Benefit Street and stuff like that. Because I look at that, and even without knowing any of the facts on the ground, because I moved countries, like, I know that just a priori that's bullshit. And and I'm kind of amazed that more people don't understand like the simple principle of like punching up. And once you know that, it's like you're not gonna ever watch Benefit Street or Jeremy Kyle or whatever it is. Which I was glad to see that show was taken off the air.
Yeah. I mean, it is horrific, and it is, the poor and the masses. Because at the end of the day, best thing for local economies, and the thing that kept so many thinker states with their head above water, in the sense of an economy that goes, works for the people and allows surviving at a minimum level of standard of living, is the payment of benefits. Because if you pay benefits into an area, you're essentially injecting cash into a particular area in the local businesses, things like that. These people aren't, as people would have you believe, sending this money abroad, investing it in the Cayman Islands and things like that. The money stays in the area, and that has a snowball effect. So paying benefits into poorer areas is a great way of applying government aid to an area, and it allows people to go to university. And so you have these northern towns that kind of got by. You then add in European Union money that paid for these areas, that invested in projects, in the infrastructure projects in these areas, that wasn't being done directly by the UK government. And you see then that the companies move in, give people jobs, and all this sort of thing. And since Brexit's been announced, and since the sort of, as it's marched further along to the right, loads of jobs have started leaving. And you've got towns being shut down. British Steel in, I want to say, is it Port Talbot? Wherever it is, it's terrible. Their customers in the European Union, because they don't know what's going on, haven't been placing orders. So the cheap Chinese steel, they're choosing that. And British Steel's gone under now, with the loss of all these jobs from people who voted for Brexit. So, as I say, who has benefited from this? Well, it's your capitalists in who own global capitalists. British Steel's, it's owned by non-Europeans, but no socialist. There has been no socialist benefits from the suggestion of Brexit or anything like that at all. So, if there's arguments, I'd say they're not arguments that yield benefits to anybody. They don't increase the support to people who desperately need it. There's no party in government, no party in parliament, including Labour, who are saying, well, when Brexit happens, we're going to be able to do this, and this. So, and as you say, those benefit streets and things like that are so obviously propaganda to get people to point and blame one group who have limited resources, which means they have zero ability to influence things to the point where they're generating huge amounts of debt on the public purse.
Right.
But and blamed, it's like they're feckless. This
is another one of my kind of guiding principles, is like, always ask who has the agency. And it's never the immigrants or the poor people. I mean, I kind of grew up in one of those northern towns, and like that welfare money was like, you used it to go to the corner shop and like buy bread and milk, that sort of thing, and maybe cigarettes too. Although I was
made cigarettes.
No, I mean, I was too. I'm not old enough to have ever been part of the generation where your mum could write you a note and you could acquire a cigarette. Although it was tried a few times. It was like, this is not going to work. We're not getting the cigarettes. You have to go yourself for the cigarettes. Anyway, you ask who has the agency, and like, how is that agency made, right? And I think that's quite a useful principle in general. Although, I mean, I'm too like a prioristic, right? Like I just look at things in this very general way. But so it's like you're attacking people who have no agency. I mean, Owen Jones wrote a book called Chav years ago, and he documents all of this and how, okay, so there was this mum who pretended that her daughter was missing. And that sort of isolated lie was used to just crack down on people. I mean, one of the things I have always wondered is just like, what do conservatives want? Like, what is there of a good life?
Stupid. I mean, it's exactly the same drive as anybody. They want to be respected. They've got a position. They've got honor. And as people age and they get older, they lose their influence. They lose their community honor. And the speed that change has been coming, it's handed power, influence, honor to young people through technology and things like that they just don't understand. So I totally get, and it's absolutely appropriate and totally valid for them to say, hold on, I don't really understand things enough for me to have my say, for me to have the influence I used to have. for me to feel important and things like that. And everybody's important. Everybody should feel important and things like that. So because from our perspective, you kind of go, right, what are the problems? What are problems and how do we solve them? And our generation talk about the climate, existential problems that are happening to the world. To a pensioner in the UK, probably one of the biggest problems they face is isolation. Another problem is the buses and things like that. So they want things that are very parochial solutions, that if you were going to do a policy for everybody, if you were going to address them with policy, it's very, very intensive, because you've got to go and sort the buses out in every borough of the country in order to stop them complaining. Once you've done that, you haven't solved any actual problem. You've made people, you've delivered convenience through government effort. And for the rest of us, we deliver government, you deliver benefit through these big changes that affect climate, that affect, the way the economy works and who benefits from the economy and all this sort of thing. The wider reach solutions, and the more, and because the lower issues should be done at council level. One of the things that central government has done is eviscerated local services, local government, and all this sort of thing. So through the austerity program, it removed the funding from the local councils. So in effect, they've got nothing that they can do to solve these parochial problems. So nobody's solving them, which just adds to this sense of impotence and, oh, we can't do what we want to do. Whose fault is that? And it's the people who want to whip this up are pointing at the European Union saying it's them. So it is I should say all of that has backfired terrifically on the Tories, who have done all this. And now, like I say, polled at the last election, polled 9% of the vote. 91 out of 100 people voted for somebody else. Because they just aren't doing what they need to do. And the only silver lining to this cloud is that hopefully the Tory party is dead. After its brief flirtation with populism, it's in a position now where it almost has no agency. Because it's spent it all whipping up this frenzy that they now don't know how to handle. A few months ago, last month, Tommy Robinson, late of EDL, was giving a speech within spitting distance of the Cenotaph on Whitehall, the national monument. And you've got a white supremacist, racist, fascist giving a speech on a platform for UKIP, which polled 25% in the last European Union elections. This time round, I think they got 2% of the vote. But you've got these events happening, which when that sort of thing happens, you look at Labour and you look at the Tories and you say, what are you doing about this? And they're shrugging and going, we don't know what to do. Because all of what's happened is everything's gone down to emotion. And how do you argue with emotion? How do you present the solutions that you say, look, where because Labour's challenge is to say your actual problems aren't a product of the European Union. Yeah, there's leftist arguments against the European Union, but the problems you face are not caused by the European Union. And to start having that argument now, so you say, look, here's what's actually causing your problems, and here are the solutions. The closest you get is the eat the rich hashtag. I mean, it's I don't know what the answer is, and I don't think anybody else does. But I also don't think that people fully appreciate the immediacy of the problem. Beyond what happens if you come out of the EU with no deal, you're unplugging yourself from this institution, which is more heads than one. Two heads are better than one. this problem-solving institution, where if you wanted to solve climate change, you'd need the world's largest trading bloc to be on side with it.
Yeah.
We're removing ourselves from it.
I mean, I think that okay, there's a lot of threads here, but I think that one, you know, Tommy Robinson is like, okay, you hate Muslims, okay, well, I mean, no one likes ISIS, right? Like, no one likes Osama bin Laden or what have you, and like the lie is always that like people like Jeremy Corbyn or what have you are sort of like sympathizers, and we kind of, because we hate capitalism, we hate the West, and therefore we're sort of down with a bit of terrorism. And there's this kind of like, we have this masochistic urge to like take in so many brown people that there are no white people left, when that is never, for most people, that is neither here nor there anymore. Yeah. You know, it might have been in like the 1960s or something. But like that has just fallen away as a valid concern. And but for people like Tommy Robinson, it hasn't. You know, I mean, you get these emails from now and then talking about how like demographically, the white race can't recover if we continue because there will be no more white people, and like the premise that like, you know, we really need white people is never.
Imagine where we'd be. Yeah, it is incredibly ugly, and the problems that are now left, like terrorism, white terrorism, which is a real problem, and they're still arguing about Iraq and ISIS and things like that that are problems, but our attention on those problems is being redirected. So people aren't talking about the Middle East anymore because Trump's just decided, do you know what? I'm going to pick a side. And there's, you know, you're in a position of, well, what can we do? No one's in a position to disagree with America on that. And people are always saying, you know, our biggest problems are on our doorstep and all this sort of thing. And trying to paint your tribe is under threat and all that sort of thing, I think you're in a hiding to nothing, because, as you say, people just don't feel that. Certainly in Europe, I don't think people feel where there actually are immigrants living in cities and towns in the UK. The people who live in those cities and towns, on the whole, of course, there's always pockets of stupidity, on the whole, don't have a problem with it. They recognize, oh, I'm an individual, they're an individual, you know, let's all crack on together. It's the people who live out in the sticks, who don't ever see anybody that looks like them, who doesn't look like them, I should say, who imagines in their head half the population becoming Muslim and throwing, you know, it's these fantasies that go in the head that they're actually reacting to. It's not real world examples of these things. It's the fantasy of these things, and that's what the rhetoric's about. It's about playing out this fantasy in your head. Nigel Farage, before the Brexit referendum, stood in front of a huge poster, billboard, put this billboard up of some Syrian refugees with Turkey's joining the EU, vote Brexit. Turkey was in no way going to join the EU. It wouldn't, and we've got a veto. So if we felt that strongly about it, we could have stopped. We can stop. Any member state can stop another joining. So there's always this veto thing. And because of the economic model of the European Union, there's a lot of countries that can't afford to join. Greece, for example, shouldn't have joined because the debt it incurred caused it to spiral out of control. You know, so certainly from a because if you imagine the Union, like, it have to be, it only works within these sort of bounds, you know. And if you don't qualify, there should be tougher qualifications for joining from an economic standpoint. Where you have to get to, but there's loads of political requirements before you can join. So you can't have the death penalty, for example. So a country with the death penalty can't join the European Union. But he's whipping up this, oh, imagine what it's like. You know, you've got a Romanian plumber. Imagine all these Turks, these swarthy Turks coming and rummaging through your drawers and things like this. And it's people reacting to the fantasy, not to reality.
Well, I mean, the first place that this question comes up is in Plato, right? Because he says people are not acting wisely. They're not considering the facts. They're not experts in the areas that they're being asked to pronounce on. And you know, in the Republic, Socrates says, well, you wouldn't have an amateur or a dilettante try and, you know, pilot a ship, right? So why on earth would you have them help run a city? And you know, the wisdom of crowds things will sort of like help you guess how much something weighs, maybe, but it won't help you determine what the best policy is. And we're seeing that now, you know, just like. But I mean, the post-truth thing is a bit silly because there's never really been much of a respect for truth. Like most people don't go through life asking themselves what's true, right? Like then most people don't have this like self-critical drive of like all the time, am I being tricked? Because it requires a lot of training as well, you know. And if you haven't like studied like science or philosophy or what have you, you might not have it. So it's kind of it's a privilege or an advantage to go through life with that skill set. But I mean, Plato's answer is obviously inadequate, right? So we're not really entertaining that. Yeah. But it's like, how can we get policies that are driven by facts and respect for facts, and for not just facts, but for true theories, or the best theories that we have. And it's quite a mystery, really, and it's like an urgent mystery because we need policies that are driven by the fear of climate change. I mean, every political entity wants the human race to continue, right? So there's no need to argue for that premise, but we do have people who think that no, like the climate is not changing, or if it is changing, then it'll change right back because it's just naturally in flux and it has nothing to do with the CO2, you know. But I mean, you look at, say, ExxonMobil, who not only deny climate change, but they like request government provisions to protect their own like physical structures from the rise in sea level. You know, I wish that was something that everyone knew, but no one does.
Yeah, I mean, what you're saying, when we used to make videos about the religious people and the things they would argue about and the fields of things that you have these arguments about, you know, they're things like relativity, they're things like quantum mechanics, and they're things like evolution. For vast majority of people on the planet, being right or wrong about those things is neither here nor there. It doesn't matter whether you're, you know, you can still operate and be successful in society whilst thinking the universe, you know, was boinked into existence 6,000 years ago. It does that kind of thing. And for the vast majority of people, they don't need to know why their iPad works. They just kind of go on and type their nonsense into Twitter about, you know, their opinions on things, and for them peer review is likes and things like that. So it's what we never do is challenge. There isn't the scope in the majority of conversation now, because it's 144 characters or whatever there is on Twitter, to challenge. There's no, because the threat to improving you know, for problem solving is criticism and conjecture. And if those things aren't part of people's ordinary lives, you criticize on Twitter. Like, I'm not sure that's quite the right idea, or I'm not sure I agree with that. And it's either shut down immediately or people take offense, or things like that. And with the celebrity side, we are more about who's in charge rather than the policies. So, you know, wanting things like proportional representation and changing the voting system and all that sort of thing, it's all about who do we want in charge? What type of person do we want in charge? It's not about this set of policies is better than that set of policies and this set of ideas is better. We went into a last election and I think only one party produced a manifesto because they all said it was pointless. Nobody reads them and our hands are tied by them. And, you know, there's no organization that goes, no, 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 you have to state your policies. It's like the Brexit Party got a third of the vote purely by just saying Brexit. So,
I mean, maybe what,
you know, people have. So again,
maybe what's needed is some kind of like external constraint, and you know, like some
war.
Yeah, you have to produce a manifesto and you have to stick to it, or you know, like. But I think that deciding on those third-party constraints is itself a political issue, and the parties that benefit from their hegemony won't, you know, agree to anything sensible, which makes the whole thing intractable.
Well, I mean, in the UK, we've always used, or in modern times in the UK, I should say, we've used the House of Lords, so which is an unelected body that does scrutiny. So the people who are appointed to the House of Lords and go on to the committees are experts in their fields. So they're scientists, they're medical doctors, they're artists, they're philosophers. You know, they're appointed to go into the scrutiny stage. So they're not generating legislation. They're going into the scrutiny stage and saying, look, this won't work. If what you're trying to achieve, this won't work. But the House of Lords has been, whenever it's put up against the will of the people, as expressed by the elected chamber, the House of Lords always ends up back down. And you see things like the enemies of the people and all this type of thing, whereas what they're trying to do is criticize and conject. So it's like the operation that improves ideas is a threat to the will of the people. And when you've got that kind of mentality, you know, in America, you've got Trump, who whips up very populist things. And from a person who's voting from Trump's perspective, it's, oh, he's listening to us. He's trying to deliver what we want. He's indulging our fears, our wants, our hopes, rather than the rich people's hopes, fears, and wants and things like that. So you can understand why they think why they like him, but they don't, because as you say, in their day-to-day life, they don't need to improve ideas. You know, unless you're an engineer doing an engineering job or a scientist, what part of your job requires you to get better at what you're doing? You know, solve problems that you're given. Most people don't have jobs where they're required to solve problems. You know, and so you don't just go like, well, I really, really think that by pouring petrol over this cake, it's going to improve it. I'll pour petrol over the cake. Well, do you want to test the cake first? Do you want to read this that petrol's poisonous? No. I just really feel petrol makes things go better. So petrol on cake, marvelous. Let's do that. You know, and then you find somebody dies. Oh, you're doing science now. You know, you've tested your theory. It was wrong. Throw the theory out. Give up the petrol cakes. What we're doing is going, no, people filming people bursting into flames when they cook these cakes, that's just mainstream media. That's this huge conspiracy of liberal libtards saying we shouldn't eat petrol cakes, you know, and that's where we are. And that's what's so devastatingly bad, is people are only ever getting up to, well, I want to see my idea implemented because it's my turn, because it's, you know.
The Tide Pod thing is interesting because it represents a kind of conservatives getting angry over things that no one is actually doing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, again, they have things, and they are, if you have an argument with 90% of the people who disagree with your position, okay, what they're doing isn't arguing with what you're saying. They're arguing with the version of you that's in their head. So I'll argue with people, and like, for example, my mum, who believes that I want to empty all the prisons. Yeah. Who believes that I want, give everybody such a chance. She believes I'm a massive monarchist. I absolutely love the royal family, sort of thing. And I can say, well, hang on, but she's arguing with the version of me that's in her head, And so it's not the case that people are, they take in what they see on the media, which can be factually accurate, and then they convert it to the vicious evil thing in their head that is their opponent and react to that. And this is why you have these news stories, and people's reaction to them are quite often baffling, and they take all these convoluted things through to, it's some horrific conspiracy theory that makes no difference, and how you get to things like flat earth theory and stuff like that. They're not engaging, they're not trying to say, as a scientist would do, is to say, okay, I see what I'm seeing here. How do I get to the purest description of that? Everything, how can I remove the biases? How can I remove the opinion, subjectivity that's laced with everything when I interact with the world? Everything theory laden. How do I get rid of it? How do I understand really what's happening? That, throwing out all the bad oranges, the Cartesian oranges, it doesn't happen, and it's not because they're stupid or evil. It's because it's not needed for them.
I think that the flat Earth one is one of the most curious conspiracy theories, because generally, like, a conspiracy theory, like, it has some like political purpose or need. Like the 9/11 one, which says that it was an inside job or whatever. Like, there's like political ramifications. Flat Earth is just like they just picked a random dumb shape and just stipulated that no, this is what the Earth really is shaped, and it has no like. What's the point? Like, you could equally well have said it's triangular or pyramid shaped, and all the same arguments would work.
I mean, the fact that people appear to genuinely believe it. It's not just because I think some of it is, we'll see how far this goes. Can we convince, people of something that's the Saint Ignatius? I believe black was white if the church told me so. How far can we take it? But I think that with that one, people seem to genuinely believe it, and will say assert things like Australia doesn't exist. You've been lied to, and it's this whole thing of, I think they see, experts in a field offering their expertise, and they mistake it for an opinion, and they mistake it for, well, they get to say this and they get to say that, open your mind and all this sort of thing. And their half an hour Googling things they agree with is equally valid in their head to somebody who spent years being wrong and years trying to correct their view to find out how things actually are working, because to them it's important to know, I want to know. Whereas, so you've got these brains over here wanting to find out how things actually are working, and these brains over here wanting to be right. And so emulating things that they think people say when they're right, when the people over here, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, but like, why flat? That's my question. Like, that was like refuted, more than 500 years ago. I mean, the ancient Greeks knew that it wasn't flat. So,
yeah, like, I mean, you can.
Okay, but here's a point.
Is what's the difference between a sphere or a triangle or a pyramid and a flat surface? And it's geometry. They're the things that are different. because you pick a plane or you pick a sphere or you pick some three-dimensional object. The difference between those objects is geometry. You know, how do angles do the sum of the internal angles add up to 180 degrees? They only do on a flat surface. So they propose something that's testable and then don't test it. I don't know. It is just this ultimate perversion of understanding. And that's what's kind of really weird about it, because it's not like, well, you know, some people lie. Therefore, this president lied, and this president's actually supporting this country over there, and that's why they did X, Y, and Z. People can you can imagine a human being acting in that way, and you can't imagine curved behavior on a flat surface. You know, it's paradoxical, and they believe it because it's ridiculous. I think it's that kind of thing. You know.
Yeah. I mean, geocentrism, you know, the idea that the planets and the bodies move around the Earth puts human beings at the center of things, right? And you can see why the opposite idea was heretical, because it takes human beings, or in the minds of the critics at least, it makes human beings less central. Okay, you can see why people might be geocentrists. That's the motivation. But yeah, I think that like the knock-on effects of like the flat Earth stuff is just like that. I mean, science is not not just a body of doctrines. It's also like a method. But like the flat Earth stuff just like hurts both, because it undermines people's confidence in established facts, and it undermines people's confidence in, you know, like a self-critical body of rational agents who are trying to figure out what's true. And
well, you look at social media, and it is you know, blue tick verified people who reach a level of popularity, and as far as the platform is concerned, the stall you get to set out is the same whether you are, you know, Mary Beard or Bearded Mary, you know, in terms of what you can say and how much weight it's given with what you're talking about. So it is this democratization of opinion, in that all opinions are valid and things like this. It really doesn't matter for the vast majority of people, because they don't ever, you know, they just put something on Twitter. What am I like? It doesn't matter, you know, and a lot of what they do only matters in a parochial sense. It only matters to their local friends. It only matters to this, which is fine for the vast majority of people in the vast majority of their lives and things like this. When you put one of those people into a position of authority and power, then you start to see all of the horrific impacts of it. You know, somebody who has the ability, you know, who can, or, you know, command an army, send in armed forces to a place, doing things out of personal interest, that horrifies us. You know, oh, well, I've got investment funds in these oil companies and they fund my campaigns, and if I upset them, they'll fund my competitor who has far fewer scruples. So I'm not going to get on this climate change bandwagon. In fact, I use all this beautifully presented material that they've handed me, you know, and show how on a flat Earth climate change is fine, you know. And these people get elected because they're just like, you know, they're just like me and all that. Nobody's appointing, and this is why if we go down the route of we should elect a party and they choose who leads, you know, they choose who the candidates should be in proportional representation, or you're just abrogating trusting a party who have self-interests, who have this want to pick the right people to choose who's in charge. And what we should be doing is going back to, what's the manifesto? How does this manifesto make my life better? You know, you look at the argument for Brexit, and like I say, nobody at the time was making any socialist arguments for Brexit. It was all, well, I suppose one, because, and even that was nonsense, was, look, we send money to the European Union, which is true. The NHS needs money, also true. So their argument goes, we won't send this money to the EU, instead we'll use it on the NHS. Or they actually said it could be used for the NHS. Now, the bit in the middle is that, yeah, we pay into the European Union, but we get a huge rebate back. Plus, we get European Union's delivered services through the, so the benefit's massive. And within a week of the vote, the pound collapsed, which meant that all international importing meant we had to spend more pounds to get dollars, the same number of dollars to buy goods from China, for example. Mm-hmm. And amount evaporated because nobody got richer by this amount. The pound went weaker. It just evaporated. In the week following the vote, we funded 18 years worth of membership fees to the European Union. That's how much money was lost, how much value was lost out of the British economy. And now you see it in the supermarkets now, the portions of commoditized, of stuff that's traded in futures and things is getting really small because nobody wants to reduce the prices, because when they ordered the coffee that was being grown, it was bought with pounds that were worth much less. So we're getting less for our money now. And not being highlighted as being, this is because of Brexit. Absolutely everything. All these companies that leave the UK to move into the European Union, the first thing they say is, it's not because of Brexit. It's not because of Brexit. Because it's very likely 50% of their customers voted for leave. So them saying, it's not because of Brexit, it's not because of Brexit, because they don't want to upset half their customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, the idea of a manifesto, of people actually reading it, and
I'd say if you can't be bothered to read it, you shouldn't get a vote.
We're being pushed into this very Platonic, politically Platonic position of that it should be the epistocracy, ruled by people who know.
Mm.
And
well, you can either have that, or you can have a civil service that works, and a civil service that you then choose who picks the priorities. What are the problems that we need to solve? What are my options for solving this problem? How it should work is a Secretary of State sits there and goes, right, we've got this problem. Civil service, go away and work up options. You can solve it in this way, and this way. And the politician can go, oh, I want this one because it allows me to do X, Y, Z. And then you can defund something that, helps people who don't vote for you. And you can play those games, and you can play those tunes, but ultimately you're getting solutions that actually solve the problem. Liam Fox, who I think is either said he's going to run for the leadership of the Tory party or is about to or whatever, he suggested that people who doubt Brexit should be expelled from 10 Downing Street. So it's removing people who are critical of this idea, which is the one way to destroy any hope of delivering something good and value-adding and beneficial, simply because they don't want doubters. So when you start getting political involvement in the civil service, and you look in America, where a lot of these posts, with political change, they all change. I want my person of that, my person in charge of that. They're no longer talking about what should be done and the why. It's, I want to talk about how it should be done. What are the options? You have to use this option and it has to deliver benefit. And Brexit's like, well, there's no version of Brexit which delivers benefit to the United Kingdom. I don't care. Find me someone who can do this option that magically developed, that allows, a triangle to be drawn on a flat surface. It's those types of contradiction. And anyone who says no will get out. And it's because ultimately a referendum only chooses a winner. It's like a battle. And we say and part of the argument is why we should implement it is because it's instead of having a battle. So we give it the bullets for the ballot box, and 17 million people vote one way, turn up on the battlefield, fight one way, and 15 million fight in the opposite direction, or 16.4 million, whatever it was, fight in the opposite direction. 70 million, they won. The invasion of Great Britain in 1066, the Normans won. They get to say what happens next. It's not that's what's best for Britain. It's they won. A winner takes all in our system. So there's no reason why anyone should think, merely by the virtue of being popular, that it's going to be beneficial for the country. And one of the problems that Parliament's got is it's trying to find a beneficial version of Brexit. You know, it's trying to do the right thing, and then it's conflicting with doing Brexit, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. But it's the popular thing to do, and that's now what we're doing. I mean, in philosophy is the method that should be used here, because, like I say, in the UK, with the House of Lords, you have people on committees trying to find the thing that's right. You know, somebody in the room saying, "I don't care if it's popular. Is it right?" And then stopping it if it's wrong. There's nobody seemingly with the ability to stop it. So now more people are going, well, we want a public vote. We want a second vote. And Brexit people, they're kind of saying, well, no, we won.
And I think that, like, you know, that argument has to have some force, even though the result that was voted for is terrible. Because I think that if you don't, then you know, the danger is it'll open up the floodgates to, you know, votes, you know, referendums being meaningless. Although, like, it should never have been introduced in the first place, motivated as it was by racism and xenophobia.
I think I'm supposed to call it valid concerns about immigration.
Well, I mean, okay, there's a book I read a few months ago by Michael Dummett, who was like used to be like one of Britain's like most well-known philosophers. He died a few years ago though, but he normally dealt with very theoretical. Michael Dummett, who was used to be like one of Britain's most well-known philosophers. He died a few years ago though. He normally dealt with very theoretical. Michael Dummett, who was used to be like one of Britain's most well-known philosophers. There's a weird thing going on. Okay, I think it's fine. So he normally dealt with like metaphysics and like logic and stuff, but he wrote this book on immigration, and he said that yes, it is a valid concern to be worried about being swamped, and that's kind of a technical term that he uses. But he says that the countries that actually, in fact, get swamped are ones that you've never heard of, and you know, you never hear of them in our media. And I forget the names of. I even forget the names of the places as well. I suck. But anyway, but then he goes on to say how, you know, immigration has for years been, and he wrote this like around 2000. It's been used as like when Labour's in power, they're accusing the Conservatives of letting too many people in, and vice versa, right? So it's just like this political tennis game, when in actual fact you never get. It's like a boatload of people come in, and then it's in the Daily Mail that, you know, we're being swamped and that they're living in mansions, and saying that it's not. You know, these ungrateful immigrants are saying that it's what we're giving them is not adequate, and for some reason people believe it, even though it's like the intrinsic implausibility of this stuff ought to leap out at you, but it doesn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think people don't have an ability to judge the size of things. So when you say, oh, well, 100,000 people have arrived in the last year or something like that, 100,000 people, that sounds like a lot of people, you know. And when you consider, I mean, if you just looked at the demographics of the UK and the problems we're now facing because people amazingly don't want to come to a country that has voted 52% against foreigners, you know, is the farms can't employ people. You know, nobody wants to come over and work. English people aren't going to get up at 3 a.m. to go and pick strawberries. You know, we've been told by our Brexit overlords that we're much too good for that sort of thing. But no students are coming over here to pick fruit anymore. So the price of fruit goes up, or a whole crop gets wasted and a farmer goes out of business, and you know, and whilst and they voted for Brexit.
That's one of the contradictions is that, you know, I mean, it's a contradiction with Trump too. Like he whips up this fervor against immigrants, but the immigrants are in some sense necessary to keep the economy going, on which made Trump himself thrive.
Yeah, I mean, you look at who owns buildings in New York, buildings that wouldn't be filled if the population wasn't high and people didn't want to go there because there's lots of consuming going on, and there's lots, you know, from a business perspective, an immigrant's the same as a native. Do you know what I mean? It's another mouth to feed, and to pay you bills and things. So there's no. You look at the demographics of the UK, where you've got these old people who are living longer, leaving work at 65, living longer, not paying into the pension pot. You need young people. People, you know, my brothers and sisters all started having kids in their, you know, late 20s, early and 30s, you know, not early 20s anymore. And then there, you know, so this older population who's, and the burden on the younger generation to pay the pensions and to pay the taxes that the older people then spend. You need immigrants in the country bolstering the population, because we're not having kids that will grow up and do these menial jobs because they're much too good for it now. You know, because we're English, we're in the 5th biggest economy in the world. You know, you need people to do those jobs. You need people to pay those taxes. Because you want to spend it on old people so they vote for you. I mean, that's been the Tory model for ages. So for them to be, for anybody to be anti-immigration from any kind of public service, the NHS is, immigrants are a net contributor to the NHS. You stop immigration, it'll deliver fewer services. It's not the case that all these immigrants are flooding over to get HIV treatment, which is another one of the lies that what's his face, Farage, said in the run up to the referendum, that there were all these immigrants coming over here to get free HIV treatment.
So we talked about, you know, constraints on, you know, the House of Lords, which is a constraint, or would be a constraint on Parliament, right?
Yeah.
But you know, what about constraints on the media, right? So like you get people. Like, I mean, the most ridiculous one was like Ed Miliband. Look, he's eating a sausage and he looks weird.
Yeah.
I think that maybe in a democracy you need it constrained by a certain amount of respect for facts, but also like a certain seriousness, like where that should not be allowed. You know.
I think education is your constraint for media.
Things that are demonstrably untrue and get away with it. Like, so I mean, maybe I'm just going full Plato here, but like, you know, we need like some kind of constraint, you know, and like you get these like media fact checkers. They're everywhere, but they're kind of powerless, and that's kind of depressing, I guess.
Well, I mean, in this country we've got broadcast media constraints, so you're not allowed to tell a lie. You can lie all you like in a newspaper, and it's only if you get sued and are forced to print a retraction that anything kind of happens. Whereas in broadcast medium, you can break the criminal law, you know, if you publish a falsehood and don't retract it. And the BBC has a lot of constraints on it. But like I say, the best constraint on media is education. There's no way you can have a public censor that's fact checking the media when probably 80% of the media is what people say to each other on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and all that sort of thing. Because we're talking, you know, it's not the case that it's the media's fault, you know, that they're telling a particular leaning, because the BBC gets accused, for example, by people on the left of supporting the right and people on the right of supporting the left, which probably means it's quite well balanced. But there are definitely certain issues that you think, what there's like Brexit, for example, there's this conflict again between what's factually accurate and what's balanced. So Brexit won. Therefore, people think that the BBC has a duty to reflect pro-Brexit values, not be so Remain. Whereas to do that, you've got to be delusional and you've got to present arguments that aren't true, that aren't accurate.
Okay, but I might disagree with you a bit here.
Say again?
Darren. I might disagree with you a bit here because, I mean, okay, so yeah, I mean, if BBC is being criticised by both sides as supporting the other side, then you sort of take that as an indicator that it's working well. It's being like that like critical voice. But sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's not just about the facts that are being reported, but the questions that are being asked. So let's take as a case study Theresa May crying when she. Okay, and the one that you posted, I think, was Owen Jones pointing out a number of things. So that she's crying not because of the people who died or the people that she's caused to suffer. She's crying because of the end of her own career, which, if we just think about it objectively, has harmed a lot of people. And the interviewer says to Owen Jones, "Can't you just respond on a human level?" Which, so like he wants him to like be like sympathetic to this woman who's crying. Well. And I think Owen Jones is right here, and I think that interviewer was wrong, and I think that interviewer is sort of like there's so much distraction and like nonsense in that in those can't you respond on a human level, as though like, well, what do you want? You want me to say, oh, it's so sad. She was such a nice person. I mean, none of that's true.
Yeah, I mean, I think my position on that was when this 60-odd-year-old woman suddenly started crying because she thought she'd done the right thing. I can empathize with that. I can empathize with somebody being told you're shit and you're fired. In the same way that if I watch a video of somebody banging their head, you kind of go, oh, that's empathy. And Owen Jones was very clear in saying, empathy aside, I can't sympathize with her. And absolutely, sympathy is an intellectual activity where you say, do I feel sorry that she's gone? And Owen Jones is responding, no, I don't feel sorry that she's gone. That's sadly different to what the BBC are trying to do, and it was Adam Bolton on Sky, not the BBC, I don't think. That's just shitty journalism. It's just lazy journalism. When something happens, it's like during a royal wedding, the journalists will find in the crowd or somebody on the side, it's a major royal celebration from the Republic people. And they'll interview them and go, what do you think of this? And the person, do you think it's, what the country wants? And on a human level, it's something we can celebrate and all this. And the Republic people then go, no, it's a massive fucking waste of money. These people are a political party. They are in their own interests, trying to stay in power. And all of the instruments of state are geared in their direction. But of course, everybody, it's shut up and hoot. It's nobody wants to hear that now. And the only time they're interviewed is when things are going really, really well for the royals. Nobody actually sits down with a royal family and go, do you understand that you are politically engaged? You have a position of authority. It gives you a lot of advantages, and the systems of state are all geared around this. And and making those arguments then, no, they're filling time. The big story is Theresa May's going. We don't know how to fill 4 hours of that, so we'll get someone who absolutely loathes the woman and say, don't you feel a little bit sorry for him, Owen? Don't you feel sorry for her? Knowing he's going to go, and generate discussion, generate shares, and generate stuff like that. He's then posted on his Twitter, 30 million people have viewed this, therefore they agree with me. And it's like, views don't count as peer review. It's like, you can't say these things. And it's that kind of where the problem with the media, my problem with the media, is this inferring people's agreement and because if people reporting on Brexit, for example, word something in a certain way, they get complaints. Hard Brexit, soft Brexit. The Brexiteers all complain and go, no, what we want is a clean break Brexit, which is no deal. It's all in this language because everybody's trying to think 4 steps ahead of spin and perception and all this, as opposed to leaving on WTO rules and things like that. And you've got people going, no, there's nothing wrong with that. Hang on. And the question that you want asked and has been asked on a number of times in the BBC is go like, name another country that's on WTO rules that doesn't have a trade agreement with anybody. And they go, we don't know. Who votes for the people who set the WTO rules? One of your problems with the EU is that you're subject to the European Court of Human Rights. Sorry, the European Court of Justice, not the European Court of Justice. You're subject to the European Court of Justice, which rules on things like trade disputes. And you're saying you don't get enough of a say in that, even though you elect MEPs. On WTO rules, why do you think that's better? If your problem was this, why is this beneficial? And nobody, and it's those type of questions. And I think it's, what I find most irritating about a lot of interviews is the questions that they don't seem to ask in favor of the easy questions. They're asking a lot of questions that are filler because they don't know how to fill this many hours. And I think, if you're looking for views and viewing figures and things and wanting to be called news program of the year, asking Owen Jones if he's sad about Theresa May resigning is probably quite a good way to do it.
So you said earlier that the education is the best cure for ignorance, right?
Yeah.
But
I would accept that as a maxim.
Well, right. I mean, I agree, but the education that we have is geared towards productivity, right? Now,
yeah.
So I mean, there's 2 sides to this, because on the one hand, you don't want to get rid of anything that's too speculative, because I think that I think that I mean maybe I'm in 2 minds about it, but analyzing the poetry of some obscure Indian poet in your English class is there's value in that, although it kind of backfires in a lot of ways, because you do that in a northern town and the kids in high school be like, I don't need this, what does this show me? So when we're trying to get people to open up their sense of what there is in the world, all it does is cause people to push that stuff out. But there's this sense of I think that I mean, of course you're going to predict that I'm going to say this, but philosophy, right? It's not just being good at maths and being good at spelling, but learning to ask the right questions and learning to punch up instead of punching down.
As most scientists say, and I agree with them, is you usually spend about 95% of your time on the problem and 5% on the solution. So understanding, certainly from things like programming, you can't do coding without learning how to organize your thoughts. So philosophy needs to be there, but it needs to be understood in more, better terms. The one thing that's kind of gone, and one of the problems with charging fees in university, is you've got a lot of people stabbing their chest saying, I'm the customer, as opposed to the tutor going, you know nothing. You are incredibly easy to fool. You're incredibly easy to take advantage of. And people will take advantage of you unless you learn how to scrutinize what people are saying to you and how to organize your own thoughts. And if you choose not to do that, there's other people who will, and they will do better than you. Because it's not about learning how to build a car or put a car together. It's learning about what are the things that are involved in movement. How do you move from one place to another to find a new solution? You know, you can have teach people how to create efficiency in a system, and you can teach people to think bigger and think more ethereally, and to ask the bigger questions rather than just the parochial questions. And I think as a society, you need to fund those things. One of the problems that we've seen about climate change is, yeah, we've got a really good understanding of it from a scientific point of view. You know, we do understand it, and we know that we understand it because we can model it and we can program it, which is one method of showing, yeah, you've got this, you do understand what's happening here. Communicating that to people who don't understand and have a difficult time understanding that is what the humanities need to do more of. And they need to understand that that's their job in society, is translating these things. Because you look on TV and you've got people like David Attenborough, who is, you know, in his early 90s now, and is you know, may not be able to do this work at the pace that he's doing it forever. But he's a great communicator and a dispassionate communicator. There's no political side to it. It's, here's the facts. Isn't this amazing? Isn't this wonderful? Yes. But here's the threat, and here's, you know, and he affects huge change. He has enormous amounts of influence and power. He used to be the head of BBC Two. You know, he's a humanities guy who is programming and communicating and things like that. So it's all very well having these, you know, understanding GPS doesn't require, benefiting from GPS doesn't require people to understand how GPS works, and that you have to make adjustments for things like general relativity and the fact that it isn't flat. You know, they don't need to understand those things, but you do need to. If we're going to fix climate change, everybody needs to play a part, you know. And everybody, so to implement all of these policies, you've got to educate people in these things that I think when you're saying to somebody you've got to pay to pick a degree, they're going to pick things that are highly paid, you know, that's a return on their investment, not necessarily the things that are good for benefit societies, which is asking these non-parochial questions.
Do
you see?
Yeah, so, no, I'm in agreement. I think that, you know, the David Attenborough case is interesting, and it's sort of I mean Bill Nye is another one where, you know, he had that the planet is on fucking fire, which, I mean, the problem is just that, you know, the right wing take it and say, oh, look how alarmist they are, and look how these scientists are using their power for leftism. And it's kind of question begging in this way, but it's like you don't get. There's like this initial shock value, and then it kind of runs out, and people, you know, the right wing and the politically apathetic people just like learn to zone it out. Feels.
Yeah, I mean, you look at what destroys. You look at what lobbyist groups do, like the NRA, for example, because ultimately you think to yourself, well, surely the second people shoot up a school and murder school children who are looking to better themselves, who are literally the future of the United States of America, who want to continue as a country, you know, and you want to continue as a family with your family name, you want to eliminate all threats to that going on for as long as possible, you know. So banning firearms, things, making it harder for crazy people to get hold of them, would be higher. It would be a no-brainer. But the NRA have managed to change this, you know, to make it the most anti-human viewpoint, and yet people will still follow it. Why are they doing it? Well, they're doing it because they don't like it when their doctor calls them fat. You know, it's, oh, I don't like these truthful things. I'd rather be right than anything else in my life, you know.
With the NRA, you know, there's this idea that, well, we're going to use the guns to maybe overthrow a corrupt government. Actually, I have this.
Which corrupt government are they going to overthrow? Because it ain't the United States.
I have this
well-armed nation on earth,
and it has the amendments on it. It's like a gift cup, and when you put the coffee cup into hot water, some of the amendments disappear. So the first one disappears when you put it in hot water, so it's like a joke gift. Anyway, the Second Amendment says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And I always find this interesting because it's always like the bearing of arms that wears the pants in this amendment, and not the well-regulated militia, which has never existed in the United States. Like, there's no militia that's ready to do anything apart from like take over an abandoned building and then ask people to send them jelly beans or something.
Yeah, I mean, the problem that you've got is you've got a 200-year-old finger wagging at you, saying, this is what you're allowed to do, this is what you're not allowed to do. And for 99% of the time, it's perfect. I do understand the argument that says, though, it's nice. In the UK, we don't have a written constitution. So we're one of 4 countries on the planet that doesn't. And it doesn't harm us. And what it does do is it hands horrific amounts of power to a prime minister with a majority. It's essentially an elected dictatorship. They can do whatever they want. They're not constrained by anything anymore. There's no checks on power or anything like that. With a written constitution, you kind of say, well, okay, if we open this up whenever we want, what's the point of having a constitution? If the government can override it, the constitution is supposed to be the thing that constrains all of these powers and things like that. What do we do? My argument's more on the human side, which is, why does anyone have a problem with unless you've got a method other than hindsight of deciding whether or not somebody should have a gun, you should apply it. So, because what you're trying to do is avoid somebody injuring themselves and other innocents. That's a perverse outcome of this amendment, the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights. It's you should want to avoid that happening, shouldn't you? In the same way as if I have a car park and I'd say, right, if anybody parks in that car park that isn't me or people I want to park, I want you to find them. If I then got fined, I'd be like, hang on, this isn't quite what I meant. This isn't what I wanted to happen. So I think it's, you can caveat your way down to well-regulated militia, yes. Bearing arms is subject to a if you're in a well-regulated militia, fill your boots. Otherwise, presumably they don't let 5-year-olds buy guns, so they've got at least that kind of caveat. What's it? Age is just a number, guys. But we've got this thing, like, if you're just going to open the Constitution every time you hit something you don't like, what's the point in having a Constitution? And these people swear to uphold it and not change it. But it doesn't. You're then in a position where it's like, well, this is actually stopping us solving a problem. And then you've got to ask, why are we maintaining something that is stopping us solving a problem? Who would want that? And the answer, of course, is conservatives, because that's what conservatives do. Is they say it's better that we have this problem. It's better that young girls have the baby, rather than having an abortion. That is them living a life that's very different to what they could achieve. The realization of their full potential in the pursuit of happiness is preferable, because it allows us, old white men, to have our way and be seen to be right and be seen to have power. They don't care. They blocked the HPV vaccine from going to schools because it's better that young girls get cervical cancer. That's preferable than the situation where they don't, because you can then, it helps their arguments about abstinence and sexual morality. Those are the choices that they're making. And to me, it's insane but it's not a function of right or wrong. It's merely a function of popularity.
I mean,
that's it.
You get people who
through education.
People who you know, are very right wing and fundamentalist, who want to just argue about abortion all day, and you know, like they want to argue about like the fundamental nature of the fetus, or in their language, the unborn child, and they get super interested in that, and I just look at it and go, but you guys don't give a flying shit about human beings the rest of the time. Why should I trust you on this? And they're going to say, no, that's just an ad hominem. You know, you should take this argument, and it deserves to be taken in some kind of isolation, and you should just address it on its own terms. And then you go, well, okay, well, I don't think that the fetus feels anything. It's not invested in the world. So, you know, it's better that you keep the abortion option available. So, but okay, so then, you know, that's sort of like intractable. But then I just wonder, like, what's the real motivation? Like, is the motivation to keep people poor and to keep people impoverished and desperate, so that, you know, then I don't get it, honestly.
To me, it's the one. It all comes down to, I want you to come and petition me for your rights and freedoms. And that position is more important to me than anything else. And that's why it's all about this, you know, elect me to make the decisions. And sometimes you'll like my decisions and sometimes you won't, but I'll get this feeling that I'm in charge and I'm relevant. The more you allow, because freedom of choice, the right to choose, is to say nobody else gets a say, no matter how reasonable or morally preferable the argument is. It's, you know, the right to choose, the right for a woman to control her own body isn't a function of, or ought not to be a function of somebody else saying, I'm going to examine it and then agree with you, lay on hands, you know, your abortions are okay, you should have them. Yeah, that's okay. We're going to allow you to have an abortion. Is different to, I don't get it. Whether I think it's right or wrong, it's irrelevant what I think. I'm not a party to this decision. I shouldn't have a say. You know?
Well, I think that liberals will post things like, just because I'm pro-choice doesn't mean I'm pro-abortion, which I don't really understand that formulation, because who would be pro-abortion? You know, if a
pro-abortion, yeah.
Right. So, but like, I think that I'm happy to call myself pro-abortion, because what I mean is, I think that the freedoms of the mother take precedence over the life of the potential child. I mean, I just think that to say that I'm not pro-abortion, I'm just pro-choice, is kind of obtuse and unhelpful, maybe. So
yeah, it throws a sop to because you know it's immoral.
Yes,
you know, and it's like, no, I want to blow this out the water for you. Yeah, and this is the thing that liberals do, which is probably not very helpful, which is indulge the interlocutor so they can better understand you, because God bless them, you know, they're obviously quite stupid. And I think what people should be unafraid to say is, no, this is my position. I'm genuinely not interested. If you want to have a debate, fine, have a debate. The right of an individual, which you keep on banging on how essential it is, you've got the freedom to murder somebody who comes into your house. I mean, I think it comes back to the thing of, like, all you need to do is to argue it to some point of uncertainty, like, does a fetus feel pain? Does a gamete feel pain? And it's these unanswerable questions that aren't relevant to them, like, which is why they'll argue about evolution. Were you there? Oh, you can't know for sure. You know, it's all in the God of the gaps of, you know, is there something about abortions that I can say I'm right? By controlling abortions, it gives these parties power over 50% of what people do. And yeah, they may feel good about allowing these women to, you know, you see going for an abortion in America, and, you know, which is, or any other health, and you've got protesters saying you shouldn't do this. In the same way of like with modern technology, you know, theoretically you could take somebody's toenail and create another baby out of it, and you don't have people going like, you must never cut toenails because they have the potential, you know, there's this potential life that could come from them. And it's because you're looking at it from a factual point of view rather than this hyper emotional point of view where they've, like I say, Googled things they agree with for half an hour, and congratulations, you just aborted Beethoven. Oh, congratulations, you've just, you know, nobody ever goes, oh, thank God, because that could have been another Hitler. That could have been another Republican. You know, well done, thank you. But, you know, the only thing, I think the only ethical thing you can do is to say, you know, whilst something's in your body, you have ultimate say over what happens. So, you know, end of, ultimately. And I don't really see a huge argument for anybody else getting involved in it, other than they currently already are and are looking to maintain their position of authority and the scope of their authority.
It's very difficult.
Why would we give back the Falkland Islands? And I say give back. We don't want to let another colonial power have them. Because that's what Argentina is. You know, it's an invading population that says, oh, well, this is close to us, therefore it should be ours. But what, you know, slamming our fists and going, there are sheep, God damn it. You know, it's all what we mean is, well, we like the idea of the sun never setting on the British Empire, which doesn't exist. And it's this, again, you're debating in your head this idea of something, even though, you know, I don't whether any prime minister has actually been to the Falkland Islands, I don't know. But yeah, abortion is one of these things, isn't it? I mean, the fact that we call it abortion as opposed to you know, women's health.
It's difficult to know.
If you said we're going to sterilize certain people, you'd find it horrid. But we used to do that. You know, oh, you're clearly something wrong with you, so we're going to sterilize you as a male, so that you're not being gay or that you're not going to have children because you don't want more of your lot around. And this is things that used to happen. And now we find it absolutely insane that somebody would infringe on a man's sexual rights. But we're still doing it to women. And because there's this whole cultural, well, we have this debate, don't we? We don't go, you know, we're not stepping back and going, oh my God, we look so evil in having these, you know, rooms of men deciding whether or not a woman should be sent to prison because she was raped and impregnated by some fucking rapist. You know, it should be all about how do we support this person to get their life back in track and on order. You know, there's nothing bad. You're not going to be blamed for anything, love. You know, the support system is here to help you in your pursuit of happiness and getting back on your feet and trying to undo the damage that we all recognize has been done to you. There's no question that you have been damaged, you know, and we want to help you. It's like going into into hospital with a broken arm and somebody asking, oh, well, maybe you deserved that broken arm. You know, it's what? It's ridiculous to talk about it, but we still do, you know.
Right. It's difficult to find some like some way of proceeding that is sort of like is good PR, you know. So like you get people who say, for instance, we don't need to indulge any philosophical argument about the nature of the fetus / unborn child because it's not relevant. And then you get people who insist, no, that's exactly what we need to do in order to challenge the idea that what we're doing is murdering babies. And I see a lot of both in my feed of like people. I think like people who are more philosophically inclined want to sort of meet that right wing idea head on and just like show using the best science and philosophy that no, it's not doesn't suffer, and because it doesn't suffer, it's okay to abort it. And then you get people, usually females, who say, no, it's my body, and sort of like the ultimate metaphysical status of what's inside my body is nonetheless my prerogative. And all the while, people sort of are wondering, how do we get more people to vote in our favor, to vote these old white men out of power? And it just kind of goes in a circle.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, to the modern United States, there's no external threat. All the threats to the current way that the US works are internal. Yeah, so they're picking things. They don't know what hardship is in that kind of sense. These people, so they're finding things that make them feel relevant and having an argument. Because at the end of the day, a Republican pastor standing for a local election or whatever, as far as his audience is concerned, is every bit as qualified to argue whether or not an abortion should occur than a woman who's had an abortion, or a woman who hasn't had an abortion and wished she had, and these types of things. Because, like I say, from a scientific point of view, it's a biological function, and there's no emotion attached to it at all. Nobody can remember being in a fetus. There's no reason to imagine that the person exists prior to the brain. But you've got religious people that think a soul is happens on conception, and there's something magical and special about that loses its magic and specialness as soon as they start taking actions, which means they deserve their lot. So they don't have a problem about extinguishing a soul or causing suffering to a soul through public policy and stuff like that. It's just in this very special case. And, you start talking about those types of arguments, and to me, you give them so much license that they don't deserve with this utter nonsense. And it's just like, yeah, it's one of these things where it's like, if you don't want an abortion, don't get one. Because for a man, you can't imagine being raped and having another person growing inside you that belongs to this rapist. Maybe some people can, but you can't imagine it. You can't know what this is. In the same way that you can't know whether the baby feels pain or not, you can't possibly empathize or sympathize or whatever with how horrific and invasive this thing growing inside of you, feeding off of you, causing you health risks and all this, when you're gonna hate it, and the child, if it is ever born, is gonna be hated by the mother every time it looks through, by every natural thing we can imagine. It's those type of questions we should all be falling over ourselves not to get involved in. Oh God, I wouldn't want to have. I couldn't imagine trying to put my opinions into the head of somebody that's been raped, so that I can feel like I'm being involved and I'm relevant and need to be consulted about this. And it's those type of things where I just think, what on earth? It's got nothing to do with anybody else. Justice should be on the side of the victims, as these people so frequently say. But except when it's a member of society, one of your neighbours who's been attacked in not just because you can say to men like, oh, imagine being raped and being given HIV. And they think, oh my God, yeah, it's absolutely terrible. And if I could be cured of HIV, then I would be. But then you've got a group of people coming along and go, but you should suffer. God wants you to suffer. This has happened because it's what God wants. Everyone, nobody had, because a man can empathize with that and understand it and imagine it, they can have an opinion on it that's valid. And the realization needs to be, that's what you're actually doing. It's not, you're not really giving a shit what happens to souls, because you clearly don't. It's slightly hypocritical to claim that you do, because other elements of your public policy would look like this. It's not consistent with those things, and I think it ought to be consistent. But instead,
as long as we're on our sort of our old atheist hobby horse.
Yeah.
Not only are these people gonna, make choices that God will hate, but he's gonna like send them to burn anyway. So like, I mean, if these people were utilitarian, they would be okay with abortion. But I mean, they're not utilitarian. It's like there's this creature creator relationship which sort of has like is front and center in their worldview, and it's like it's this teleology of you've got to sort of use your body in a way that God is okay with, and it's you've got to have the child because God wants these people brought into the world. But then the appeals to pity that they make are not sincere. You at least you can show that, I think, demonstrably, that the appeals to oh, look at this cute little baby with its big eyes, and like, no, you don't give a shit. You really don't.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, there's nothing about humanity that makes me believe for a second we genuinely care what happens to other people's kids. I mean, from a point of view of what's being claimed in this, because like I say, you won't even change the law when a bunch of innocent, God-fearing children get murdered at a school shooting. You'd rather that happened than lose your NRA funding. So in the hierarchy of what we'd rather, dead kids is not this overarching, that's the thing everybody cares about.
Mm-hmm.
It clearly isn't. And even the people complaining about abortion don't think that. So why are we entertaining this idea that they have? Like I say, from my point of view, the answer is all of that discussion, whether you decide it's a good thing or not, should be irrelevant. You shouldn't have a say.
No, I wish it was over.
Yeah, but it's not, and that's what's outrageous. And all it takes is popularity to do it. And I think every single state, every single county in the United States probably has a marginally higher population of women in it than men. It's in women's hands to vote these people out so that they don't have a say. Because in first past the post systems, that's all you need to get rid of shitty ideas. If you had a proportional representation, then shitty ideas would represent 50% of the Senate, as opposed to, well, let's put the best people in and get rid of all of the terrible ideas out there, which is what first past the vote allows you to do. Get rid of people that are saying these things. And I don't know why people don't, because it really should, because they're also a little bit racist and voting for this guy who, he may not like abortions and things, but it doesn't affect me because I've not had one, or I can't imagine me having one, and therefore I'll vote for him because he validates my prejudices and all this. I mean, it's all this,
well, there's
to continue
a feedback loop of like whoever gets elected sort of has some degree of power over like what we expect culturally, which in turn keeps the same kinds of people in power.
Yeah, I mean, you grow little versions of yourself. So, I mean, this is the thing: is people don't like to feel their kids are smarter than them. They don't like to feel that other people are smarter than them, and so being, reassured constantly that, oh no, you're special, you are right, you're so right, we're going to make more copies of you, and things like that. Whereas it's not a politically easy thing to say. You're probably not going to play a huge role in solving the problems that face this country. And now the problems that face all these countries are so huge and complex. Because if you think about it, up until the creation of the NHS, from Henry VIII's time until the creation of the NHS, the population of the UK was fairly constant and consistent, So then you've got so for hundreds of years, you've just got about 14, 15 million people in England. And then you've got this spike, this huge growth in people. And you've got to think, well, how do we house them? How do we feed them? How do we do all of this? And what the Conservatives would say is, we'll just stop people having children. There are some problems we're meant to have, but instead, progressives say, well, no, we can solve these problems. We can make it so you can have more people there. You know, and the immigration, going back to the immigration argument, you've got this argument against, well, do we try and solve these problems to infrastructure, services, and all this sort of thing, or do we just go, well, we'll just stop immigration, problem solved? You know, it's the thing is, like, do you meet the challenge or do you run away from it? And with all of these, the Conservatives tend to follow the route of, I mean, it's like with fairness, the concept of fairness, the principle of fairness. The Conservatives in this country judge fairness as we'll just put you, it's a race to the bottom. So you're all treated like shit. Yeah. Whereas the other version of fairness is, well, you all get the same opportunity, the same ability to move on and move forward. You know, this version of fairness, if you're, I mean, you look at how many Johnsons are in politics. Boris, his brother Joe, his sister Rachel. You know, it's not because they've all had the same opportunities everyone else in the country. You know, nepotism. Don't knock it till you tried it. It's why they are where they are. They're not, turkeys ain't going to vote for Christmas, and so they want the same thing to continue. And loads of people in their ordinary lives just want the same thing to continue. When they reissue Microsoft Word and they change where everything is, it makes you feel like an idiot because you've got to learn it all again. I used to be an expert. I've now been overtaken by this program. And that's the Conservative urge. It's not unreasonable, it's predictable. And again, it comes down to, we need to be able to explain progress in terms of we're trying to make people's lives better by removing the things that are making them worse. And when you've got part of your policy is, well, if there's certain things that make your life worse that we want you to endure because it's preferable than us being overtaken by people who want to solve all the problems. So if we keep some of these problems like HP, like cervical cancer, like, you know, it's funny how it's always women's health, but, you know, we'd rather these things happened because that situation is preferable to the opposite, which is, you know, who was in charge becomes less relevant. Having power isn't about me as a person. You know, it's about, well, who's best at solving problems. That's who we should have in government, because that's the job they need to do.
You want to take a 5-minute intermission?
Yeah, we can do. Yeah. And what time is it? So we've been doing this for almost 2 hours. I mean, I don't know if you want to kind of take a week's intermission.
Yeah, we can. I was just hoping to refill my my coffee cup.
No. I mean, I think because there's this, we can talk about this forever. So maybe if we wrap this up at 2 hours, and then if people want to ask any questions or anything in the comments section, if anybody actually watches this, then they're very free to, and we can pick up some other points and address them next time.
All right, that sounds good. Thanks for having me on your show, Darren.
It's as much yours as it is mine, Jarl. I'm just the face because your laptop's not very good. So, but yeah, thanks for watching. And obviously, if you've got any urgent desire to hear us ramble on about anything else, let us know. Otherwise, we'll just rant on about how awful Conservatives are, which is worth it in itself. But yeah, bye.